What is up, BookTube? It is Monty, and today I am back again, once again, with the start of another video. Today I am doing my March wrap-up. Are we going to ignore the fact that we are 10 days into the month of April? Absolutely. We're just going to pretend this is coming out at the beginning of the month, and that you and I are on the same page there. Sound good to you? Sounds good to me. So, I feel as though it is a little important to say that in the month of March, I had this unofficial, official, goal-esque situation where I wanted to read a grand 31 books by 31 women because it was Women's History Month. It felt like it would be something that was fun. And I wound up reading 18 books by women. I read 4 books we're not going to go over today because they're being saved to discuss at a later date. But the things I did read really ran the gamut from adult fiction to, I think there's a young adult book in here, from fiction to nonfiction, romance to thrillers, a lot of shit we're going to go over. So grab yourself something to drink, get comfortable because this could wind up being a rather long video, and let's get into it. Now, the month of March did not start off on a particularly high note. I read Black Candle Women by Diane Marie Brown. This book I gave 2 stars. I only picked this up because Aaron from Booked and Busy wanted to buddy read this in the month of March. And just like our buddy read from January, where you're supposed to read Night Crawling, didn't go so well for me. This was another miss. This is the story of a group of women who are from New Orleans, I want to say, and their family has a curse on it. And so we're following these 3 women, and it's really about the youngest of these women, like the granddaughter of the family, coming to learn about this curse that is on the family, why this family has been cursed. There's some flashback chapters. And overall, I just felt that this book, one, was a little muddled, and it didn't really have, or didn't arrive at its destination in quite a satisfactory fashion. If I were to look at my Goodreads review, like I said, it was aggressively fine. Like, this book isn't bad. I just think that when it comes to what this book is, a story of like family and these women and their lives, I've seen better, which isn't, a particularly helpful critique. It's just that these women now, all these weeks later, they have not stayed, they haven't stuck with me because they were just very generic characters. There was nothing particularly memorable about any of them. I just remember that it was giving a little childish, the situation that they were in and the way that the curse was supposed to have happened, and the reasoning behind the curse. All of it was just not for me. So Black Candle Women isn't really a book that I would recommend, but it's also a book I wouldn't like go out of my way to dissuade somebody from reading. Like, if you were really dead set on reading this book, you might enjoy it more than I did. It just didn't do anything for me in particular. The next book I picked up was Me Being Very Generous. Me Being Very Generous. This is another book that this is a book I gave 4 stars, but objectively, it probably is closer to something along the lines of a 3-star read, and that was The Farewell Tour by Stephanie Clifford. This follows the rise and fall into obscurity of a country music woman from Walla Walla, Washington in the 80s. So she comes of age around the Great Depression. We see her moving into the big city, trying to find her life, and it really just is her chronicling the rise and fall. My big issue is like the rise and the fall were in rapid succession, and so this idea of her going on a farewell tour just felt a little bit outlandish to me, just because, again, like, she was relevant for maybe 60 seconds. And so to go on this like tour, I understood why we're going on this tour. At the beginning of the book, we find out that our main character has like a throat issue, and that she won't be able to sing for much longer. And so obviously she's going to have to go on this tour now. But like I said, like she was never really, it never really felt like she was relevant, even though she had apparently all these collaborations with these staples of country music that you would think of and are names to you. So it just, that was a bit of a miss for me, but I did appreciate the story. I do like a story like this. I do like books about musicians. I like books about people fighting their way into an industry. I appreciated that it was a country music situation because there aren't too many books like that. The only ones I can think of are young adult, so a little bit country, and You'd Be Mine are the two off the top of my head that are about country music. So I think that the farewell tour was definitely interesting. It was definitely entertaining. It was definitely worth my time. Overall, though, I do think that I was just particularly inclined to enjoy that kind of a book. The next book that I read, this book I also gave 3 stars, and it was Lady Justice, the Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America by Dahlia Litwick. This one, I think I just had different expectations going in. I really thought this would be a much more broad look at women in the legal profession, and it really was narrowly tailored to women. I want to say narrowly tailored because there were chapters not expressly about the Trump presidency, but a lot of what was discussed was women, the law, and the battle to save America in relation to the Trump presidency, even if these women had been active in various ways before, during, and after his presidency. And it was, like I said, it was interesting, but overall, I do think that, like, because of the very narrow look at women, the law, it just kind of fell flat for me. There was lip service paid to women who had paved the way for the women who were currently the focus of the book. It just, and I guess if you were really this book is also not very long, and so the length of the book should have tipped me off that it was going to be more narrowly focused. I just think that I wanted something more than the book was ever going to give, so it was not entirely fair. But for what it did give about women, the law, and, you know, with the battle to save America during the Trump presidency, it was a really solid book. I really did learn some things. There was some chapters were more interesting than others. There were some chapters that just didn't really feel like there was enough there to merit a full chapter. There was also this odd mix of personal situations and anecdotes in relations to the subject of the chapter in ways that sometimes it felt like we were detracting from the women each chapter was supposed to be highlighting. So that was kind of an issue I had at some points in the narrative, but it was a really easy read. I read it in the course of like a night. I just listened to it. It wasn't very long. So I got something out of it. I just don't know if I would rush out and tell other people to read this book in the same way that I would recommend other nonfiction, which I have coming up. After Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America, I picked up Everybody Rise, also by Stephanie Clifford. This is a book that you would think is right up my alley. We are in New York City. We're following the elite of the elite. It is 2006. The housing bubble is, just about to burst. We're right around the corner from financial collapse. And we're following this woman whose family has been living beyond their means for a little bit too long, and her mother has been really trying to get her into the elite of New York society, even though they don't really have the means to do so. And it's not even trying to be in the elite of New York society that exists in 2006, but the elite of New York society that existed in like 1906. It's a very interesting look at this character who doesn't really belong, but is trying so desperately to belong, and is racking up debt and is going out on further and further limbs and putting themselves in more and more precarious situations that they are not really going to be able to recover from. And I have to say that the audiobook narrator they were doing a lot. They had an accent going, even though an accent was not necessarily required. There's a scene in this book where a character is like paddling a boat, and I will forever remember that. At least for the rest of the year. I don't know if I can go forever because, my memory, not what it once was. But for the rest of the year, I'm going to think about how this narrator performed this scene with our narrator, our main character in this boat, trying to get back into the society that is kind of starting to pull away from them, and the way that her family is being more and more ostracized as the book goes on. The scene of the boat is just it's slapped. Like the narrator did not have to go as hard as they did, and I do appreciate them for that. So I did wind up giving this 3 stars, which is very generous because Goodreads has dragged this book to hell and back. I don't think there's a single person on Goodreads that liked Everybody Rise. And so for me, Stephanie Clifford, between Everybody Rise and the Farewell Tour, I don't know if they're an author for everybody. I do think that they're just an author's whose personal taste aligns with my personal taste, and so I'm willing to give them a benefit of a doubt even when the book is a little bit just okay. So do take that into consideration if you do decide to pick up that book. The next book I picked up in the month of March was The Kingdom of Prep, the inside story of the rise and near fall of J. Crew. I have never been a J. Crew girly. I'm not a J. Crew girly. I never will be a J. Crew girly. But I feel like so many of the characters that I appreciate in fiction, both narrative and on TV, would be J. Crew girlies. You know, I think that kind of fits in with the kind of person and the life that I tend to read about. And so I was interested to see a look at this kind of business story. I also do like business nonfiction. I really like Bad Blood for that kind of a thing where it's like what's happening in this company. And while J. Crew is obviously no Theranos, like J. Crew is not out here scamming anybody, I do think that J. Crew is an interesting look at a brand that has always been successful in terms of shaping its own identity, but also always being very precarious in terms of the financial side. We see it at the beginning of their coming into being when they were at the top of the catalog game. They were, the number one catalog girly. They were pulling the creme de la creme of the fashion models. And then you see, but as they're doing this, they are like barely breaking even. Like the profit is like non-existent. They are just a razor's edge away from being in the red. And you can see as the business expands and as it gets bigger and as they move into malls and as they make mall culture, J. Crew culture, and you see the different people who are behind the design team and seeing them become the face of the brand. And always, without fail, like whoever's running the design team, like they'll make it bigger than what it once was. But at the same time, because it is so inextricably linked to them, the moment that person is no longer the tastemaker, the person with the go-to for the ideas, you can see the brand start to like really take a downturn. And what Maggie Bullock was able to do with this piece of nonfiction, I think was really entertaining. And even for like me, who has no history with this company, who has no reason to be invested in the story of J. Crew and the various people who have run it and the various people who have tried to buy it and turn it around and milk it for the success that it is, I think that you two will be intrigued at the rise and near fall, and the fact that it hasn't fallen is something I think of a marvel. It's something to I after I read this book, I was really just kind of gagged at how a company could come so close to utter collapse and like it's not like wild to me. Then I read my best book of March, and I read All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham. I don't think Stacey Willingham gets the credit that they deserve in this current era, this resurgence and popularity. I don't know if resurgence is the right word, but in this like era where the mystery thriller is kind of the go-to genre fiction, even though it's like barely genre fiction, really. But this like really popular genre, I don't think that Stacey Willingham gets the shine that they deserve because their debut novel, which the title is uh escaping me, so one moment while I tap on over in Goodreads because it's going to bother me. A Flicker in the Dark. A Flicker in the Dark has a ton of ratings. I'm not saying that it's slept on by any means. It has 185,000 ratings on Goodreads, which is a lot compared to other books. I just finished a book today that has like barely over 100 ratings. So 185,000 is a lot. And I know that All the Dangerous Things and A Flicker in the Dark were both Book of the Month selections. So like again, like nobody is like actually sleeping on Stacey Willingham. I just feel like I don't ever see her picked for the book clubs, and I don't see her in the discussions where I see like a Riley Sager or a Lucy Foley or Mary Kubi, like those other people, Miranda, whoever, Megan Golden, like all those other people I feel like get talked about. Stacy, she's out here delivering bangers after banger because the first book of Flicker in the Dark was really good. That followed about this the daughter of a serial killer, and All the Dangerous Things were following a mother whose son was abducted a year before the book starts. And so we see her now a year later, and we get flashbacks to her childhood where there was also a mysterious incident that involved her family. And then in the present, we have a situation where her son is missing, and people are kind of speculating that maybe she had something to do with it, maybe her husband had something to do with it, because there's like no evidence of anybody breaking into the house. And the investigation is kind of stalled. So we're seeing her trying to keep the story alive. She's agreeing to do this podcast about her missing son to understand it. And the more you see of her life, both before and after her son has disappeared, like it's just chef's kiss excellent. And the fact that I haven't seen anybody else, maybe if I did like hung around booktube more often, I would see more people talking. But A Flicker in the Dark and All the Dangerous Things, specifically All the Dangerous Things, I gave 5 out of 5 stars, no notes. It was an excellent read. From an excellent read, we went to something that was a little bit more a surprise. It snuck up on me, and that was Mame by Jessica George. Mame follows Maddie, who is a Ghanaian, I think they're from Ghana. They're a Ghanaian immigrant, or maybe they're not an immigrant. Their parents were Ghanaian immigrants, and they're like first generation in the UK. There's something like that. And we see her taking care of her father because he is ill. I think he has Parkinson's, if I'm remembering correctly. And her mother is kind of in the picture, kind of not. Her mother is currently splitting her time between the UK and Ghana, which is something she's been doing for a while. She also has an older brother or a younger brother. She has a brother of some nature, of older or younger, who isn't really pulling his fair share either. And so Maddie feels that she is trapped at home with her father, taking care of him. And it's not really what she wants to be doing in life. And so over the course of the story, we get to see her making more decisions for herself. We get to see her coming out of her shell. We get to see her get fucked over a little bit. We get to see how she goes from being this like liar essentially to being someone who was more honest and forthright about all the things that they're dealing with and how that impacts them. And it was really, really good. Maddie is definitely a flawed character. I don't think it's easy to like Maddie because she is so annoying at times. But by the time we got to the end of the book, I really felt that we'd gone on a journey that was worth experiencing, and I was happy that we had taken the time to go on the journey to see this arc of a character within this book. So I didn't hate it. I wound up at the beginning of the book, I was really convinced I was going to give it like 2 stars because I was just like, Maddie was so insufferable, and I was just like, this, I feel bad for you, but I also just like, I need you to do something for yourself. Like I just need you to feel comfortable standing up for yourself just a little bit. And so as the book went on, I got to see more and more of that, and I got to see this actual arc starting to come together, I was able to appreciate the story more. A book I wish I'd been able to appreciate the story of was Thief, Liar, Lady by D.L. Soria. Not gonna lie, they kind of got me with this one because I'm a sucker for a fairy tale retelling. And so they sent me the arc, and at first I was just gonna ignore it. But eventually I was like, it's a fairy tale retelling. I'm doing this 31 Women in 31 Days. It could be really interesting. Let me read it. Thief, Liar, Lady is meant to be a Cinderella retelling, and I think it just bites off a little bit more than it can chew. And the first mistake that it does is it sets the story after the ball has happened. So we meet our Cinderella character, Aislinn, after the ball where she meets the prince. And we know that she is there to deceive him because she is half, I think it's like Elysian. I don't remember, but there's two countries essentially: the good country where everyone currently resides, and the country that is sort of the, I want to say the source, but they have a magic in this world relies on this powder, like on this mineral. And the other country has a lot of this mineral, but they only use it for religious purposes. And so the country where the Prince Charming is the Prince Charming of, they've been at war with the mineral country for a minute. They've been at war for a very long time because they want to be able to use the Prince Charming's country is not as religious, and they're willing to use the magic powder in everyday life. Like they use it for their weaponry, they use it to make people look prettier. Like they're just happy to have the magic. And so in the background of this story, there is this like revolutionary narrative, but the world just never comes together. There's never enough time for the character to really be invested in Aislinn as a revolutionary. Aislinn never comes off as a revolutionary. She doesn't really feel like she's part of this revolution because we don't see her before the ball, things happening after the ball where she's supposed to be in love with this prince, but she's using the prince. It just, nothing in this narrative really came together to sell itself to me, to make me believe in anything that was happening, to make me want to root for anything that was happening. And there's a love triangle here. It felt very messy. It felt very juvenile for what it was meant to be attempting to do. And overall, I couldn't get with it. I'm okay with the wishy-washy magic system, but the magic system here was a little bit too washy-wishy. It just, again, like there's nothing solid or tactile about this narrative, and so it was hard for me to find myself invested in any of the characters, and I actively was rooting against them at multiple points in the narrative because it's just so stupid and convoluted that I just don't think there's any amount of editing other than like starting this book in a completely different location and spending more. It was doing too much for being a standalone. There were too many plot threads that it was trying to do. We had again like this romance situation. We had a revolution situation. We had large swaths of times where plot points just had to be avoided to focus on something else, and so it was really hard for that book to come together for me. Then I did my little detour into the Alley Hazelwood of it all. So I read Love Theoretically, which is their upcoming adult book, where you have a character whose name is one moment, because I am blanking. So we are following Elsie. Elsie is a physicist, I want to say, and we see her. She is a theoretical physicist, and so a lot of this book is dealing with the I want to say it's rival. I'm going to use the word rivalry. Is this rivalry between theoretical physics and experimental physics? And so Elsie is a theoretical physicist. She's currently adjuncting at a couple of different colleges in the Boston area, and she gets called into, I think it's MIT, or I don't think it's Harvard. I think it's MIT. She gets called into some university for a full-time position. And so the first half of the book is her interviewing. But there is a problem because Elsie, in order to also make some money on the side, she's been a fake girlfriend. And at the beginning of the book, we see her as a fake girlfriend to this one dude who's kind of nice, but he's just, he's he keeps to himself. And so when he's going to his family functions, Elsie goes as his girlfriend, obviously. But at that function, it's going to come back to bite her in the ass because Elsie is supposed to be, when she's the fake girlfriend, she doesn't really tell people about herself, her real self, because these are people who, she's there for a night. So she just like puts on a mask and she plays pretend. And it comes back to bite her because when she's going on this actual job interview, the brother of the person that she was fake dating at the beginning of the book is there. And so now he thinks that Elsie is lying to his brother, and he is not really happy about it because this person, Jack, is all about the truth, all about honesty. He doesn't like a liar because reasons that the book does get into. I thought it was a little bit foolish, a little bit melodramatic, but the book does address why Jack Turner Smith hates liars. Again, it was a little foolish. It was a little Okay, sir. Overall, I gave this book 3 stars. I enjoyed this book probably more than I enjoy. I didn't enjoy this more than Love on the Brain. I really liked Love on the Brain. Like Love on the Brain and Below Zero are really good Ali Hazelwood books in my opinion. They're the only ones that I actively recommend to people, at least before Love Theoretically. And this was really fun. I really enjoyed seeing Elsie on the job hunt. I enjoyed seeing a side of I really like in romance novels that the character has other goals outside of the romance. So it was really nice seeing Elsie struggling with trying to find a job that was able to support her. I liked the friendships that Elsie had outside of the romance with her love interest, Jack. I liked getting to see Elsie and this other physicist kind of getting along, trying also forming a friendship outside of the relationship that she had with Jack. And so seeing this narrative play out was really fun. I did have a whole reading vlog where I read this, so I'll leave that linked in the cards because I go into more detail over there. And then after Love Theoretically, I picked up Ali Hazelwood's other upcoming release, Check and Mate. And this one, you guys, was 5 stars. It was 5 out of 5. I have very little complaints about this. I read that in the same vlog as Love Theoretically. Check and Mate was YA. And so I did have some reservations because I was like, I've never given Ali Hazelwood above a 3 star. I don't really love her adult fiction the way that everyone else loves her adult fiction. And so I was very nervous going in that this would be a book that was really gonna flop hard, particularly because Ali Hazelwood has like the most weird sex scenes at the end of her book. And so while I was nervous, I was like, well, maybe because it's a YA book, there won't be as much weird smut happening and I'll be able to enjoy it. And what really happened was in Check and Mate, our main character here, whose name is, I want to say is it Mallory. Mallory, she has the most full life of all the protagonists because like a lot of other YA contemporary books that have a romance element, I really like that YA kind of leans more into the contemporary elements. So this is obviously a book about chess, and so Mallory was a chess champion as a child, but she quit playing after her father. I think she found her father cheating, and so she stopped playing chess, and now her mother is sick, and so she's kind of just taking care of her mom and her sister. And so we get a lot of that in the book. We also get a lot of her friendship with her best friend who is leaving for college and how that's impacting their relationship now that they're no longer in the same city. We also get to see Mallory re-entering the world of chess, partially because it's a way for her to be able to support her family. And for her, she is no longer viewing chess like she did when she was a kid. Like now it's really just for business. Like she doesn't really play chess for fun anymore. She's only plays chess in a competition setting. And so getting to see her and her love interest and her friends, it was all just a really good mix of situations. And I just 5 out of 5 stars. I think this is easily Ali Hazelwood's best book yet. I think that so much has been said about her writing the same book because so much of her relationship dynamics are similar and that the characters get off on the wrong foot and then they have to learn to get along with one another. And while Mallory and her love interest here also, what is his name? Is it Tom? His name isn't Tom, is it? Nolan. But Mallory and Nolan are also kind of getting off on the wrong foot. They also, I think, have a much easier road of reconnecting. There's not so much like an actual out and out hatred or miscommunication on their part. It's more um I don't know. I don't quite know how to describe it, but because there's not this like out and out hatred between them, I think that they have a much easier time building a bridge. And when they do connect with one another, it was just much more satisfying. And I appreciated it a lot more because, again, Mallory had a very full life outside of her relationship with Nolan. And so her having a relationship with Nolan didn't really feel like, oh, this person completes me or this is the right person because his dick just feels so good inside of me. It really felt like this is the right person because I've spent so much time actually getting to know one another, and actually spending time with one another. And Mallory has a whole life outside of him, and he just adds to her life. He isn't her entire life. So, Check and Mate is a must read. Then we get to a book I couldn't even rate, and that is The Blood Gift by N.E. Davenport. Here's the thing. Um, this is just not a good book. This book goes on for about 200 pages longer than it needs to. So much of this, it's not fair to say that the blood gift and the blood trial should have been one book, but it really should have been. The beginning of this book, the first 25% does not need to exist. The first 25% of this book is the most meandering piece of literature I've ever read. The way that this book concludes was foolishness. I thought that between Priory or the Orange Tree and the Blood Gift, both giving us Twitches as the ultimate final battle, I'm bored. I'm bored of it. I'm sorry. And there really was, again, only 200, and that's being very generous, 200 pages of actual content that felt like it needed to exist here. And much of that really felt like, when I started reading this book, I was so lost because in some ways, I think it can be a real benefit to a book if it feels like we just picked up right where we left off in the last one and we're running. But here, while it had some of that feeling, it didn't feel like we were running to a destination that the book had in mind. Because once the narrative really started flowing and we really saw what was happening and we really saw what things were going to be doing, the book ends really abruptly. Like, the actual goal of the book, the actual thing that the characters are trying to do, happens very early on. Like I said, the first 25% doesn't matter. And then you could really argue the first 35%, but by like 65% of the narrative, the characters have achieved their objective. And then there's a secondary climax, much like in the first book, where the trials are over well before you think they ought to be. And then the book continues on for forever because there's other things that we're trying to do in that book. This book also ends and then has a second climax that isn't nearly as good. And so it feels like when you get to the end of the book, it's a flop. And so I really have a hard time understanding who this book was meant to be for, who was enjoying this book, and why this was split up into two. Particularly because I have like very real memories of on Twitter when the blood trials came out that everybody was trying to like tweet about the book, and how the author was like, tweet about the book so I can get to write my conclusion and I don't have any other book deals lined up. It's like, if that's what was allegedly in my mind happening at that time, and this is the conclusion that happened after all of that, I would have much rather the book just end with the blood trials, because this I felt was inferior in every way. And at no point did this feel like a book that needed to exist in the world. In what seems to be a running theme, this next book is a book that I rated higher than it has any business being rated. So I read Rain, which is book 4 in the American Royals series, and I gave this book 5 stars. I can tell you objectively, this book is not 5 stars. This is a victory lap of a book. It deals with the conclusion of like the end of the last book, Rivals. So that's handled here. But a lot of what Rain feels like is the season finale, like maybe even like the penultimate episode of a show that you know is ending. So we get a lot of cameos. We're running around tying up loose ends. Characters are getting to do things. Characters are saying things that feel very much like, I know this is the end, and we're going to conclude it and we're going to put a bow on it. It doesn't feel like a book series that is canceled. Originally, I think this was supposed to be a duology, and so when you read the ending of Majesty, it really felt very open-ended. It really didn't feel like everything was totally satisfied. And while Rivals, I feel was a little messy. I still had a fun time with it, not nearly as fun as I had before. And then Rain, I think, again, is it's still a little messy, but at least it feels like the book knows its ending. It feels like Catherine McGee is wrapping up everything that she would like to wrap up. And while this is definitely the kind of a book series that could continue on with spin-offs and offshoots, and this world could be explored further with prequels and sequels and spin-offs and all that other good shit, I do think that Rain feels like a swan song of a book. And it's a nice capstone to a series that I've enjoyed. And so even though it's probably closer to like a 4 or even as low as like a 3 star, I think for what it is as a fun, good time, I'm okay giving it 5. But I do think that it's definitely not a 5 for everybody. Like, this isn't a book I'm like, oh yes, everyone's gonna give this book 5 stars. Like, no. I think this is a book that if you are invested, then maybe you too will give it 5 stars. But otherwise, it's definitely not the best book in the series, and I can fully admit that. The next book I read was an interesting one, and it was Patricia Wants to Cuddle by Samantha Allen. And this is another book where I feel like I needed it to be longer. I understand why it was shorter, but I needed it to be longer because I think that the messaging, or shorter, like that's the other thing. I think that there was a B plot that was introduced about this missing family and this missing girl. I would have completely torn out of the book because I think that this book exists in a weird space. It's, I think, in my opinion, too long to be classified as a novella, but not really long enough that it feels like a novel. So I needed more pages, or I needed less pages. And so this is the story of 4 women who are on a reality dating competition. They're the final 4. And instead of going to some far off exotic location that's out of the country, they're going to the small island off the coast of like Oregon or Washington. And it's they're able to film here for very cheap because, unbeknownst to the women, but known to the production or the producer, there's been this island is known for like mysterious happenings. And so it's a horror novel. I think that the cover kind of gives away that it's a Bigfoot story. And so most of the book is not that horrifying. There's a lot of like there are chapters about like fan speculation about like who's going to be the ultimate winner. There's chapters dedicated to this missing family and this girl, the sister of this missing girl, who's looking for her sister on this island. And then there's some horror elements at the end of the book that I won't go into. But I think that for me, it wasn't long enough, or it was a little bit too long, and I needed it to fit more neatly one way or the other for my personal enjoyment. Otherwise, I think that it's another aggressively average book that your mileage may vary. It's not a book. I don't read a lot of horror. Based on things I've seen discussed on BookTube, it doesn't really sound like other horror that I've read. But I don't mean that to mean like, oh, Patricia Wants to Cuddle is like game changing or super unique. It's just different enough for me. And I really did just want more from this. And I think that I think Samantha Allen could have delivered. I just think that they chose not to. I then revisited an old friend, Jessica Goodman, whose other 2 books I had previously given 5 out of 5 stars, and I read The Counselor. Here we're following there's one perspective whose name is eluding me, because of course it is. So we're following Goldie, and Goldie is a scholarship camper person. And so she was able to attend Camp Alpine Lake on a scholarship. And it's there that she meets her 2 best friends who are definitely wealthy. They're the elite of the elite. And it's their last summer at camp. They're all working now. They're counselors, hence the title of the book. And Goldie is very much looking forward to spending one last summer with her best friends, because it's been kind of rough for her because she has been accused in the small town of being I think the drunk driver who is responsible for like injuring or hurting one of the athletes in this small town. And so she's kind of been socially outcast for that during the school year. But school year is over, even though she's been held back, she's looking forward to being at camp again with her best friends. And then when she's at camp, a dead body happens to appear in the lake, and the dead body is the person who she had been secretly dating, and the actual responsible person for what has made Goldie an outcast in the small town where they live. And so obviously we have a little investigative moment. We are trying to get to the bottom of what everything is, what trying to get to the bottom of what has been afoot. And I had a fun time. It's not the most twisty, turny, shocking mystery thriller out there, but I really like Jessica Goodman because I like that she gives you breadcrumbs. I like that it's not super over the top. It's just, it makes sense. It feels very tightly plotted. It feels like there is intention in the way that the story is being told to the reader, and I really appreciate that in my mysteries. And so if that's something you appreciate in your mysteries, if you're looking for something that is fun and set out of summer camp, but obviously a dead body, this could be the book for you. Almost done. Then I read In an Orchard Grown from Ash. I feel like I am one of the only people that liked In a Garden Burning Gold. That book was not very popular, but I thought it had some potential. In an Orchard Grown from Ash, much like The Blood Gift, felt very unnecessary. I don't know what Rory Power was thinking. I mean, I enjoyed it more. So, like, I didn't rate The Blood Gift, and I at least gave In an Orchard 1 star, but it just felt completely unnecessary. The first book had really odd pacing where it was really slow, and then the third act was like a desperate sprint to the conclusion. And I don't even think that there was a lot of rising action in an orchard. It felt very one note the entire time through. The entire time through, which was wild to me because the ending of the last book really made you think that something really big was going to happen. And in a sense, something really big does happen in an orchard grown from ash. I just don't think that the emotional connection to these characters and their situation made it to where I was invested in what the big thing was. And so, because the series is just so ugh, I personally cannot bring myself to recommend anybody even give the first one a chance to see if this is something that could be for them, because I can't imagine anybody enjoying the second book. Like, I don't know what the aim was. I don't know what the goal was. And so it makes it really hard to recommend a book when there's nothing going for it. The characters were boring. The plot was boring. The magic was boring. Like, nothing stood out in this sequel. Nothing standing out was not a problem that happened in If You Could See the Sun. I didn't understand going into this that it was a fantasy book. When I checked it out from the library, I picked up my hold and it had the fantasy sticker on the side of the book. I was a little confuzzled. And this is the story of a girl who is at this elite academy. I think she's in Beijing. She's somewhere in Asia, in China. And this school costs a lot of money. Her parents are sacrificing a lot for her to be able to go to the school, even though they're sending her there on like a reduced rate. And so she's there at this school because she's very smart, and this is the only school she's ever gone to. But her parents, at the beginning of the book, we learn they're hitting some hard times. They're hitting on some difficult situations. And so they're like, we're gonna have to take you out. And so you can either go to public school here in China, or we can send you to live with some family we have in Maine, and you'll go to a Maine public school. And our main character is not really looking forward to this idea. She does not want to go live in the United States. She does not want to go to Maine and leave like behind her IB program. And I have to say that while I was not an IB student, I did go to an IB high school and I had IB friends. And I don't think a single one of my IB classmates that I was friends with appreciated being an IB student. And none of them really thought the IB diploma mattered that much. Um, and I think they're right based on. I mean, to be fair, like none of them were trying to go to a college overseas. A lot of them did get into nice elite institutions that I myself would have never thought to apply to. But the way that our main character in If You Could See the Sun was like, I can't go to a Maine public school because they won't have an IB program. I thought that was just the height of foolishness. It's also an enemies to lover story. But the problem that I had with this book was I just could not believe what was happening. And so the fantasy element is our main character, after she has this dinner with her parents, or it might have been before she has this dinner with her parents, she discovers that she can turn invisible. And she decides she's going to use this newfound ability and to charge money and do things for her classmates, like pull pranks and just do small things, do a little eavesdropping, get information, that kind of a thing. So she approaches her little love interest, who is the son of a tech billionaire man kind of person, and has him design the app. And so he knows, and I think her roommate eventually finds out she can go invisible. And so a lot of the book is her racking up money, trying to figure out a way for her to stay at this school. And the part that was just really hard for me to understand was, in what world our main character was going to come up with hundreds of thousands of Chinese, I don't know the correct denomination here, but let's just say hundreds of, well, let's just Google it. Let's just Google it. Name of Chinese currency. Renminbi is the official currency of the People's Republic. A won is a unit of currency. Popular analogy draws from the sterling versus the pound. Okay. So hundreds of thousands of renminbi. Hundreds of thousands of it. And explained to her parents where she got this money. Like, it wasn't clicking. It wasn't clicking. It wasn't clicking for me at all. Like, I'm sorry. Every time she was charging her, I understand her classmates were very wealthy and they were paying thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars for some of her services. It was just a little ridiculous. And then there's the big part of the book, like the part of the book where she's going to get all the money she needs for the rest of her to reach her goal or whatever, involves helping to kidnap a classmate, because again, she's going to this elite school, but there's only but so many spots, and they're fighting over the spots or something stupid. And so she's like, yeah, I'm gonna help my friend get kidnapped. And then she's in the middle of helping this person get kidnapped, and she's understanding that, like, this person's in danger. And so now she's trying to, like, save this person from being kidnapped. And I just felt that it was a hot mess, because it's like, why would you think that it was going to be like a nice gentle kidnapping? Like, it's kidnapping. Like, it was just a little too unserious for me. The romance was a little bit too all over the place for me. Nothing about this book I found to be worth my time and investment. And I was really let down because I have seen nothing but praise for this book. And I'm from the turning invisible to the raising the money, everything about this book just didn't hit for me. And so I gave it 2 stars. 2 stars. I decided not to read Anne Leong. I should have looked up how to pronounce this person's name before we started recording. But I decided not to read Anne's next book. But they recently announced a adult novel. I might read the adult novel. We'll see. The penultimate book that I read in the month of March was Magnolia Parks, another book I didn't quite rate. I think in my spreadsheet I gave it 3 stars. Everyone and their mother has wanted me to read this book, and I can understand why to a degree, to an extent, to a point, but ultimately this book was bland. Like, I don't think that Jessa Hastings is a horrible author. I don't think that they're talented, but so many of these chapters were just boring. You could tell me that this was a book that was set over 2 weeks, 28 days, 48 hours, a month, and I would kind of believe you. To me, still to this day, the most memorable scene is the scene where Magnolia comes home and her mother is in a ball gown drinking, I think she's drinking a mimosa. Maybe I made that part up in my mind, but she's walking around in this ball gown and she's like putting things in boxes or directing movers because she has found out that Magnolia's father is an adulterer, and she is just having a moment. To me, that's still the most iconic part of the book. But overall, like, it was fine. Like, I don't really understand how this became a TikTok sensation. It's fine, it's average. I don't have some of the complaints that other people do. Like, I don't really care that there were, so many pop culture references or names of the designers that were splashed here and there and everywhere. I wouldn't call this a love triangle book the way that I've seen other people describe it. I wouldn't call the book messy. I would call it, toxic, sure, but messy, no. It was giving more raggedy, which is very different to me than messy. Like, messy is like fun and pulpy, and very little of the interplay between Magnolia and BJ felt fun, partially because BJ felt very underwritten. It was giving cardboard cutout. It was giving porn dialogue. Like, I couldn't take him seriously. Tom Inkland was easily the best character in this book, but I believed at no, like, not only did I not believe that he was ever going to really be with Magnolia, I don't think that Tom or Magnolia ever thought that they were going to be together either. And so seeing people describe this as a love triangle felt very disingenuous to me when none of the people in this story are acting as though they're in a triangle. I think that Tom is very much clear, like, Tom is very clearly a character who was telling Magnolia that she deserves better than BJ, but he's also a character that fully understands that Magnolia is going to keep going back to BJ and that he is not really. I mean, they come to a mutual understanding at the very beginning when Tom is introduced to be in this fake situationship. And even though I think they wind up having sex, it's still very clear that they're never ever going to be something that's serious. And so seeing people trying to be like, oh yeah, it's a messy and there's a threesome and not a threesome, but like a love triangle. It's just like the reading comprehension has gone out the window. Like, because that's not what's happening in this book. And then the last book, and fittingly, the worst book I read all month was Fool Me Once by Ashley Winstead. And I will have to go back and put a spoiler warning because so bad. Now, me and Ashley, we already have a very tenuous relationship, okay? Me and Ashley never see eye to eye. We are not soulmates. But this book was particularly bad. Here we are following Lee Stone, who is a PR person working in the great state of Texas for a electric car company. And her boss is trying to lobby for this bill that would replace all of Texas's state-owned emergency response vehicles with green electric vehicles. So green electric fire trucks and ambulances and police cars. Maybe if like Texas has like a state, like the actual mechanics of this, I'm not entirely sure how this would work because it's, to me, the more I read of the book, I was like, but does this automotive company even have the capacity to build the necessary vehicles? But that's all in the weeds. The part that I just couldn't really get over is that Lee is very clearly an alcoholic, and I don't think the book really adequately addresses that. Like, this woman has a complete and utter dependency on alcohol that was very unhealthy. And her love interest, I thought, was very strange. This is my problem with this book. I think his name is Ben. So years and years and years ago, back in their graduate school days, because I think Ben is in law school at the time, Ben and our girl, Lee, they dated. They dated one another. But Lee, you should know, has a very unhealthy relationship with being in a relationship. Because when Lee was a child, she discovered that her father was having an affair. And so to Lee, everyone cheats. Because not only did her dad have an affair, her first boyfriend cheated on her. And he cheated on her in a very public way because he was having sex in a church, which just feels like very extra, but definitely extra to do in the great state of Texas. Like, I don't think people in Texas are getting fucked in churches when they're like 16 years old, but what do I know? I've never lived in the great state of Texas. Maybe they do that for fun. I don't know. But when he's fucking this person in a church and he's like 16 years old, the wall collapses. And so he's exposed for having sex in a church with some other person that's not Lee. But then when he goes to apologize, it's found out that he has another girlfriend in the congregation. And so Lee goes off to college, not trying to be in a relationship, but she meets Ben, they have a relationship. But then, again, she's not healthy in relationships. And so she's convinced that, like, her dad and her church boyfriend, Ben is cheating on her. Ben is a cheater. And she's going through his phone, and she's like, haha, see, he's texting this girl, he's cheating on me, I'm gonna cheat on him. And so she cheats on him with somebody, and then it's revealed that Ben wasn't cheating. And he flees the state of Texas after barely passing his, finals and graduating from his law school. And he goes to the great state of California. And then, of course, because it's a romance novel, he is back in her life, and these two unlikely people have to work together to get this bill passed. And the part of the book that really I refuse to believe is that Ben went to California and he built an entire life for himself. and he was in a relationship. And for the first half of this book, Lee and Ben spend it flirting, and it's just like, y'all are horrible people. Like, you're just horrible people. But also, Ben was like I said, he has a very, Lee being a flirt and doing this weirdness that she wanted to do in the first half of the book, being an alcoholic, all that bullshit, fine, whatever. I think it's very bold to like flirt with somebody when you hate cheaters, fine. But Ben had built this whole life with this girl in California. And the only reason he moved back to the great state of Texas was because his current girlfriend was taking a job there. And so only when she had taken a job did he go, you know what, I too will take a job. But then in the third act of the book, it's revealed that he took this job not because his girlfriend was moving back to the great state of Texas, but because he was still hung up on Lee. And he'd been hung up on Lee for the past like 8 years. And I'm just like, that's not normal. And if it is normal, like, I think it's very weird to date somebody and only be with them and then move entire like states and bullshit. It's just weird. It's very weird to me. And then it was another situation where characters in the book are like, I don't like liars. Lying is the most horrible thing you could ever do. And then Lee is upset because Ben didn't tell her something, even though what he didn't tell her had really nothing to do with her and wouldn't have, I mean, could it have potentially impacted her? Maybe, sure, if you squint. But it was just utter fucking foolishness. And so nothing about this book had me rooting for Ben and Lee to be together. And then the epilogue. The epilogue of this book is the biggest load of horse shit I've ever seen, because I'm sorry, there's no way that you could get anybody in the great state of Texas to vote for Lee. Lee is not running for fucking office. It's fucking stupid. Then I found out that the boyfriend candidate, which I had planned to read because I have the arc, it's sitting on my Kindle. I found out the boyfriend candidate was about her sister, and the synopsis of the sister's book makes absolutely no sense given what I read in Fool Me Once. And so while Ashley Winstead had me believing that she was a good author, even though I didn't like The Last Housewife or In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, Fool Me Once, it was horribly written, horribly constructed, fucking foolishness from start to finish. And so I think me and Ashley Winstead are done. We're over. We're dusted. It's in the books. Can't do it no more. So I'm sad that I ended the month on such a horrible book, but there's nothing more I can say about it. But that's everything that I read in the month of March. I'm happy to have had the time to relive it all with you. Go ahead and leave your best or worst book in the comments below, and I will see you guys again in another video. But until then, and until next time, bye.